Hey, what's up, guys? I was talking to Wrestling real early this morning, and it took me a while to figure out where he was going or what he was trying to do. But basically, he was wanting to know the viability of shooting a Blackbird full auto on CO2 with just pretty much stock other than being full auto. I don't have any experience doing that right off the right out of the gate. I went ahead and bought two paintball bottles, one 1600 psi output and the other one 1000 psi output to power my Blackbird that I had Max do for me. And that's expensive for sure to just pull the trigger on a setup like that right out of the gate. So anyway, he was talking about expansion chambers and this and that, and possible ways to warm up an 88 gram CO2 cartridge. And I got to thinking about it. We can just take a 13-3000 and basically do the same setup where we would tether to a scuba tank, but we could use a refillable CO2 bottle to do the same thing. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I don't even have 6 AA, so we're just going to be using the 314-500s with the dummy cell. And that'll give us what, 12.6 volts, which is what a lot of people run the chip mod off of anyway. Now what we're going to do is, I think we're going to first just shoot it off the CO2 running through the hose to the gun, and we'll record that and just see what it looks like. And then we're going to disconnect all that, connect the 13-3000 directly to the magazine. We'll screw it right in there, and then we will run the hose from the CO2 to the fill nipple on there. So our 13-3000 will be a big expansion chamber. There's not really much of an expansion chamber on the Blackbird. It's basically just that little tube that comes up. I think it might have an inner diameter of something about like that. So I don't really know a whole lot about CO2, but that doesn't seem like a very big expansion chamber. Now, a couple of things that we're dealing with. CO2, when it's compressed, it's a liquid and it's self-regulating. So it self-regulates room temperature about 800 psi. Well, we're going to be running it through that 13-3000, and that particular one is regulated at 1400 psi output. So anything going out of that and through that is just going to run right through the regulator, because it's nowhere near the pressure that one is designed to deal with. So my thoughts on this are, when I'm messing around with Superbirds, they pretty much stop working right at 800 psi. It's just not enough to get them out of the pocket because of clutch tension, I guess. So I'm guessing, if you had CO2 going into a 13-3000 or whatever bottle before you run it through the gun, if you had a regulator below 800 psi, I think some of the SLP Ninja regulators, they go like 500 and they're slightly adjustable. So I'm not exactly sure of those pressures. But if you could drop it below 800 psi, then you could actually get the use out of a regulator, and you would have more consistency per each shot up to a certain point where the CO2 just cools and it does all kinds of weird stuff when it's compressed and when it's decompressing. So let's get on with it. And first off, we're going to shoot just straight up CO2 and see how that does at full auto. All right, we've got it all hooked up. This is my son's Blackbird. The only thing that's not stock on the inside about it is it has the chip mod, so it's not a Superbird or anything crazy like that. So let's see what it does at 1,200 rounds a minute, how it fares with the CO2. So that's actually not very bad. I don't know if it's going to show up on camera, but I'd say maybe after the first 8 or 10 shots, you could tell that the CO2 is not quite vaporizing completely because you see a big puff coming out of the end of the barrel. Now, let's go ahead and swap this over, put the 13-3000 on here as an expansion chamber. Before we do that, I figured since I've got a chronograph right here, I'm going to get the gun good and cold again, and then we'll get some velocities on the chronograph. It'll take it a while to completely warm up back to room temperature. So I'm just going to put the camera on the chronograph and shoot some full auto next to it, and then I'll put some rounds over the chronograph. Starting to think this isn't going to make any difference because we've got that coil hose that itself is acting as an expansion chamber. The fire rate is only 1,200 rounds a minute, so maybe this would work better in a Freebird. I don't know, we'll just have to see what happens. Now, I'm looking at this, and I've got some gas left in it, so I need to get that out. I'm hoping this will work to give you guys an entry to air, because a bottle like this, it's not too big to fill up with a hand pump. And they're quite affordable. The good thing about these is they make this one and then one that's like 22 inches or something like that. These are 3,000 PSI bottles. They never require a hydro test. And they're great if you've got varmints or something like that. You don't have to have a big bottle. Should have adjusted that camera. If you go out hunting, you're not going to need a ton of shots. You get about 100 full power shots on one of these, depending on what your output pressure is. And you can also tether to a scuba tank, just like we're going to do with this CO2, but then you can actually use your higher output regulator that's designed for high pressure air. One of the things that I found filling high pressure air bottles is you don't want to do it fast. And if I pop this check valve, this slide check valve on here, it's going to fill this up really fast. What happens to me when I fill them too fast is I'll blow a burst disc. So I'm going to turn this valve off, drain all this gas out of the line, put it back on, close the valve, and then fill it up from what we call the UFA, or Universal Fill Adapter. It's filling. Might even be able to see the gauge go up. Now, another thing to keep in mind is, because we're dealing with a liquid, I don't want to turn this upside down, because then I'll get liquid CO2 in here, potentially. And you know, filling it will make this bottle warmer. So I'm going to get a couple of test shots over the chronograph with our expansion chamber. Nice and warm. I'd say it's about 85 degrees, maybe a little warmer. Sorry, trying not to cheat. Wow, about 100 feet per second less. I'm gonna let it rip on full auto and then come back to this. Okay, it was that long until I started to see the CO2 gas coming out of the barrel, so that was delayed. The bottle is still warm. Let's get some shots over the chronograph. Well, very interesting. As I said before, I'm really not familiar with CO2, so if anybody who is very familiar with CO2, I'd love to hear from you in the comments, because I was expecting, about 100 feet per second gain more, but instead we had like 100 feet per second loss, which just goes to show you that don't take my word for it. If there's something that doesn't seem right to you, or if you think there's a better way, go ahead and experiment. And I'd love to hear from you on any of that stuff. That's the way that I've been able to get this, these BB guns to where they are. Lots of other people have come up with these ideas that I use. I mean, granted, I've had my fair share of ideas. I've just basically tested everybody's ideas and taken the ones that I think that I found to work the best and incorporated all of that into what I do. But yeah, I'd really love to hear from you. But it looks like this is probably the best way to run a stock Blackbird with the full auto mod chip if you can't afford to get into the air game. And this is just a 20-ounce refillable CO2 bottle. Dick's Sporting Goods refills these for me. I like to use them with my flamethrower, so I've just got a bunch of them laying around. But yeah, this is definitely going home with me. Gonna give it to my son so he can have fun with it. And there you go again. It's not in the crazy velocity ranges that Freebird's in, so there's a lot less chance of major damage happening to somebody's windows or something like that. I mean, don't get me wrong, 560 feet per second or so is nothing to sneeze at, but it's nowhere near the ranges that I deal with on a daily basis. All right, well, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something, and if you didn't learn anything, I hope you're totally confused like I am, and I look forward to hearing from you in the comments. Later.